Quantum leap is not an outside miracle. Most people think a quantum leap looks like fireworks, a sudden breakthrough, more money showing up, a new relationship appearing, a dramatic change that finally proves something happened. And quietly, without anyone saying it out loud, many people are waiting for life to shock them into freedom. They wait for the moment when circumstances finally cooperate, when the bank account looks different, when the body feels lighter, when someone else changes, when the outer world gives permission to relax. But let me ask you something gently, without pressure. What if nothing outside has changed yet, but something inside you already has? What if you wake up one morning and the same room feels different? Not because the furniture moved, but because you are no longer standing in the same place inside yourself. Is that not a leap? We have been taught to recognize transformation only when it makes noise. We have been conditioned to believe that real change must be visible, measurable, and impressive to others. So we overlook the quiet shifts. We dismiss the moments where the old identity loosens its grip. Quantum leap, in its truest sense, is rarely loud. It does not arrive with applause. It does not announce itself with dramatic signs. Most of the time, it arrives like a deep exhale you did not know you were holding. People often imagine quantum leap as life rearranging itself around them. But the deeper truth, the one you only understand after walking through enough disappointment and enough striving, is this. Quantum leap is not a shift in circumstances. It is a shift in identity. And once identity changes, circumstances have no choice but to follow. Think about how many times you chased external change, believing it would finally make you feel whole. You thought, when this happens, then I can relax. When I arrive there, then I will be at peace. When they see me differently, then I will feel free. But peace never stayed. Satisfaction never lasted. And each new achievement quietly asked for another one. That is not because you failed. It is because circumstances were never the source. The world outside you is more like a mirror than a machine. It does not create your state. It reflects it. And mirrors do not change when you shout at them. They change when you move. Quantum leap begins the moment you stop asking life to become different so that you can finally be yourself, and start allowing yourself to be different, even while life looks the same. This is where the misunderstanding lives. Many people believe that identity changes after success, after healing, after abundance arrives. But in reality, identity always changes before anything else can move. Not through effort, not through pretending, not through forcing yourself to think positively, but through a subtle inner recognition, a moment when you realize you are no longer the same person who needed to prove, chase, or defend. It can happen quietly, while washing dishes, while sitting alone in the car, while watching the same sunset you have seen many times before, but feeling it land differently in your body. Suddenly, the urgency softens, the tension drops, the constant internal dialogue loses its authority. Nothing outside announces it, but something inside knows. This is why so many people miss their own quantum leap. They are waiting for the river to change direction, not realizing the river has already stopped trying to flow upstream. They are waiting for the storm to pass, not noticing that they are no longer standing in the storm the same way. Quantum leap does not require you to become someone new. It requires you to stop performing the version of yourself that was built to survive. That version learned how to control, how to anticipate, how to brace, how to stay busy so it would not have to feel uncertainty. And it worked, for a while. But survival is not the same as living. At a certain stage of maturity, something inside grows tired of effort without ease, of achievement without peace, of knowing so much, yet feeling so little freedom. This is often when people stumble into the idea of quantum leap, not because they are chasing power, but because they are exhausted. And exhaustion, when listened to honestly, is not weakness. It is intelligence. It is life signaling that the old identity has completed its role. Quantum leap does not ask you to fix yourself. It asks you to stop carrying an identity that was never meant to be permanent. You see, identity is not who you truly are. Identity is who you learn to be in response to life. The child who learned to stay quiet to feel safe. The adult who learned to work harder to feel worthy. The seeker who learned to search endlessly to feel whole. None of these are wrong. They were necessary at the time. But quantum leap begins when you no longer confuse necessity with truth. When you realize that effort is not the same as alignment, that control is not the same as power, that striving is not the same as growth. The shift happens when you stop asking, "How do I make this happen?" and begin to notice, "Who am I being while waiting?" That question alone changes everything. Because the moment identity softens, resistance dissolves. And when resistance dissolves, energy moves. Not in dramatic ways at first, but in gentle, unmistakable ways. You start responding instead of reacting, listening instead of anticipating, allowing instead of managing. Life feels less like a problem to solve, and more like a conversation you trust. And from the outside, nothing may look different yet. But inside, the ground has shifted. This is why quantum leap cannot be forced. It cannot be manufactured by discipline or strategy. It happens when consciousness matures enough to release the need to control the timing. When you finally understand that letting go is not giving up. It is giving life permission to meet you where you actually are. Many people fear this moment because it feels like doing less. And we have been trained to believe that less effort equals less progress. But quantum leap does not operate by the logic of effort. It operates by the logic of coherence. When your inner state becomes coherent, the outer world reorganizes naturally, like iron filings aligning when a magnet is present. No pushing required, no convincing necessary. This is not fantasy. This is not denial of reality. It is the quiet law experienced by anyone who has stopped fighting themselves long enough to notice it. Quantum leap is not an escape from reality. It is deeper participation in it. And it begins the moment you recognize that you are no longer waiting for life to change before you allow yourself to arrive. You arrive first, not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly. And that honesty, more than any external miracle, is the true beginning of the leap. 1. You do not step into a new timeline. You become a different person. There is a subtle misunderstanding that lives deep in the collective mind, and it has quietly exhausted generations of sincere people. We were taught, sometimes directly and sometimes without words, that transformation means leaving this life behind and entering a better one, a new timeline, a different version of reality, a future where things finally work. And so, for years, many people have been standing with one foot in the present and one foot leaning forward, waiting for life to catch up with their hopes. But the truth I learned only after walking through enough disappointment, enough effort, and enough inner resistance is much simpler than that. You do not step into a new timeline. You do not escape into another reality. You become a different person standing in the same moment. And because of that, everything begins to reflect differently. There is a profound difference between changing circumstances and changing being. Circumstances are visible. They are measurable. They are easy to point at and say, "This is better," or "This is worse." Being, on the other hand, is quiet. It is the inner position from which you meet life. It is the lens through which everything passes before it becomes an experience. Most people spend their entire lives trying to rearrange circumstances while leaving their inner position untouched. And then they wonder why the same patterns keep returning with different faces. When identity remains the same, reality has no reason to change its response. Think about this gently. Two people can live in the same city, walk the same streets, face similar challenges, and yet experience completely different worlds. One feels constantly pressured, unsafe, behind, and exhausted. The other moves through the same environment with a sense of steadiness, trust, and quiet confidence. The difference is not the timeline. The difference is who they are being while standing inside it. This is why quantum leap is often misunderstood as a dramatic external shift. People imagine a door opening into a new life, when in fact the real movement happens internally, almost invisibly, like a tectonic plate slowly repositioning beneath the surface. Nothing seems to move at first, yet everything that rests upon it will eventually rearrange. When the old identity begins to dissolve, the world does not need instructions. It responds automatically. Reality is not stubborn. It is precise. It reflects the frequency, the posture, and the assumptions you carry about yourself and about life. When those assumptions change, the reflection cannot remain the same. The old identity is usually built out of necessity. It formed in response to uncertainty, fear, lack, or pressure. It learned how to manage, how to anticipate problems, how to push forward, even when the body was tired and the heart felt heavy. That identity often believes that safety comes from control and that progress comes from effort. And for a long time, that may have been true. But there comes a moment when the old structure begins to feel tight, like clothing you have outgrown without realizing it. What once felt responsible now feels heavy. What once felt motivating now feels draining. This is not failure. This is evolution asking for space. When that identity begins to loosen, reality feels different almost immediately, even if nothing visible has changed yet. You may notice that the same challenges no longer trigger the same emotional storms. Conversations that once felt charged begin to feel neutral. Situations that used to demand immediate action now invite patience. These are not coincidences. These are signals that the inner position has shifted. You do not need to chase the future when you are standing firmly in a new present. The future only had power over you when you believed something essential was missing now. When identity changes, the sense of lack dissolves, and with it, the urgency to run ahead of life. The present moment becomes sufficient, not because it is perfect, but because you are no longer negotiating your worth with it. Quantum leap happens when the answer to the question, "Who am I?" changes, even slightly. Not at the level of words, but at the level of felt truth. When you no longer see yourself as someone trying to arrive, fix, or prove, but as someone who is already here, already allowed, already included in life. From that place, action still happens, but it comes from clarity instead of fear. Decisions still arise, but they are not driven by desperation. Movement continues, but it is aligned with the current instead of pushing against it, like a river that finally stops exhausting itself by flowing upstream. Circumstances follow identity the way shadows follow the body. You do not argue with a shadow to change its shape. You move, and the shadow adjusts naturally. In the same way, when being shifts, circumstances reorganize without force. People respond differently. Opportunities appear without strain. Even challenges arrive with less weight, because they are no longer interpreted as threats to your existence. This is why trying to force external change without inner change feels so heavy. It is like rearranging furniture in a house whose foundation is unstable. No matter how often you redecorate, something still feels off. But when the foundation settles, the house feels different even before anything is moved. Standing in a new present does not mean pretending everything is fine. It means meeting what is here without resistance, without the internal story that says, "This should not be happening," or "I am behind." That story belongs to the old identity. When it dissolves, presence becomes natural, and from presence, coherence emerges. Coherence is what the quantum language tries to point to, even if it is often misunderstood. When inner state and outer action are aligned, reality responds smoothly, not instantly in every case, but consistently. And consistency is far more powerful than sudden miracles. Many people miss this because they are looking for signs. They want evidence that the leap has happened. They want confirmation through results, but the real confirmation appears first as relief. A quiet sense that you are no longer fighting yourself, that you are no longer trying to outrun the present moment. You know identity has shifted when you stop asking life to prove itself to you, when you no longer need guarantees before you relax, when you trust movement without needing to see the entire path. This does not make you passive, it makes you responsive. It places you in dialogue with life instead of opposition to it. Circumstances were never the cause of your inner state. They were the echo. And when you understand this, deeply and honestly, the need to manipulate the external world softens. You stop pushing the river. You stop arguing with the mirror. You stop waiting for permission to feel whole. You become someone else, quietly. And because of that, the world eventually has no choice but to meet you there. 2. The old identity is built from fear. The new identity emerges from permission. There is a reason the old version of you feels tired. And it is not because you were weak or misguided. It is because that identity was built during a time when fear was necessary. Fear taught you how to survive. It taught you how to stay alert, how to anticipate danger, how to keep moving, even when rest felt unsafe. The old identity learned to try harder, to stay guarded, to constantly prove its value, not because it wanted control, but because control once felt like protection. If you look closely, without judgment, you will see how much of your effort was born from fear of lack, fear of not having enough, fear of losing what you gained, fear of not being enough in the eyes of the world or even in your own quiet moments. This fear did not make you broken. It made you functional in a world that often rewarded tension more than trust. The old identity believes effort equals safety. It believes vigilance equals responsibility. It believes rest must be earned and peace must be justified. So it keeps moving, adjusting, managing, improving, not because it enjoys the struggle, but because stopping once felt dangerous. That identity is not wrong. It is simply outdated. At some point in life, usually after enough striving has failed to deliver lasting peace, something inside begins to soften. You start to notice that effort no longer brings the same returns. Pushing harder does not bring clarity. Controlling more does not bring security. And proving yourself does not bring rest. This is often mistaken for burnout or loss of motivation, but it is something deeper. It is the signal that fear has completed its lesson. The new identity does not arrive through force. It arrives through permission. And this is where many people become confused. Because permission feels passive to a mind trained by fear. It feels irresponsible. It feels like giving up. But in truth, permission is not collapse. It is alignment. The new identity does not ask, "How do I make this happen?" It asks, "What am I no longer willing to carry?" It does not demand outcomes. It allows presence. It does not brace for impact. It trusts the ground beneath its feet. Permission is the willingness to stop fighting the moment you are in. Not because the moment is perfect, but because resistance has stopped serving you. It is the decision to let life meet you where you are, instead of forcing yourself to meet an imagined standard. When effort relaxes, energy does not disappear. It reorganizes. What once leaked into anxiety returns as clarity. What once fueled overthinking returns as intuition. What once burned as urgency settles into steadiness. This is not theory. This is lived experience. When you stop gripping the steering wheel of life with white knuckles, the body breathes differently. The nervous system softens. Thoughts slow down. And from that slower rhythm, more intelligent movement becomes possible. The old identity believes that without effort, nothing will happen. The new identity discovers that without resistance, things move more naturally than expected. Like a river that no longer exhausts itself by flowing against its own current, energy begins to carry you instead of draining you. This shift is often subtle. You may not announce it to anyone. You may not even have language for it at first. But you will feel it as a quiet permission to be where you are without apology. You stop waking up with the feeling that you are already behind. You stop measuring your worth against productivity. You stop interpreting uncertainty as danger. And importantly, you stop mistaking rest for failure. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop proving. The old identity needed validation to feel real. The new identity knows it exists without witnesses. The old identity asked for permission from outcomes. The new identity gives itself permission before anything changes. Many people fear this stage because it feels like standing still. But standing still from fear feels very different from standing still from trust. One is paralysis. The other is presence. Presence is powerful because it is stable. From stability, movement becomes coherent. Actions arise naturally instead of being forced. Decisions feel clearer because they are not clouded by urgency. This is why letting go is not quitting. It is returning to the correct position within yourself. It is stepping out of the role of manager of life and back into the role of participant. Life does not require your supervision to function. It responds best when you are in relationship with it, not in opposition to it. The new identity understands that worth is not earned through exhaustion. Safety is not built through tension. And fulfillment does not come from endless becoming. Instead, fulfillment arises when you allow yourself to be here without conditions. Permission is not laziness. It is honesty. It is the honesty of admitting that effort was once necessary, but now it is optional. It is the honesty of acknowledging that fear once protected you, but now it limits you. When permission replaces fear, the body relaxes first, then the mind follows. Then reality begins to rearrange, not because you demanded it, but because you are no longer blocking it. Opportunities appear without strain. Conversations soften. Timing becomes more graceful. Not perfect, but kinder. And even when challenges arise, they no longer threaten your sense of self. They become events, not identities. This is how you know the new identity has arrived. Not by what you gain, but by what no longer frightens you. You no longer fear slowing down. You no longer fear not knowing. You no longer fear being misunderstood. Because you are no longer trying to earn your place in life. You are allowing it. And allowing is not passive. It is deeply active at the level of consciousness. It is the act of trusting the intelligence that moves through you when fear is not in charge. The old identity was built to survive. The new identity is built to live. And when you return to that rightful position, effort transforms into ease, control transforms into cooperation, and life stops feeling like a test you must pass. It begins to feel like something you are finally willing to be present for. 3. Quantum leap does not require more knowledge. It requires releasing old beliefs. At a certain point on the inner path, something quietly uncomfortable begins to surface. You realize that you know a lot. You have read the books. You have listened to the talks. You understand the concepts. You can explain manifestation, consciousness, energy, and awareness with clarity. And yet, when you look honestly at your life, you see that very little has truly changed at the level that matters most. This realization can feel discouraging at first, especially for sincere seekers. Many people assume that if transformation has not happened, it must mean they have not learned enough yet, so they keep studying. They collect more ideas, more techniques, more language. They hope that the next insight will finally be the missing piece. But Quantum Leap does not respond to accumulation. It responds to subtraction. Knowledge by itself does not create a leap if the identity holding that knowledge remains the same. The mind can understand truth while the nervous system still lives in fear. The intellect can repeat spiritual ideas while the body continues to brace against life. And this is how many people become informed, articulate, and still internally confined. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a misunderstanding of where transformation actually occurs. Quantum leap does not happen because you add something new to who you are. It happens because something old is gently removed. A belief loosens. A false assumption falls away. A long-held inner conclusion quietly dissolves. Most of the beliefs that limit us were never consciously chosen. They were absorbed early, often before we had language. Beliefs about who we are allowed to be, how much we are allowed to receive, how safe it is to relax, how hard we must work to deserve love, respect, or peace. These beliefs hide beneath knowledge. They do not announce themselves loudly. They operate quietly in the background, shaping perception, choices, and reactions. And as long as they remain unexamined, no amount of new information can override them. You can understand abundance intellectually and still believe, deep down, that ease is not meant for you. You can speak about self-worth while still measuring your value through effort. You can talk about surrender while still gripping control with your entire body. This is why learning alone rarely produces lasting change. Quantum leap requires a different kind of honesty. The honesty to look not at what you know, but at what you assume. Not at what you believe consciously, but at what you live as if it were true. Ask yourself gently, without trying to fix anything. Do I believe that I must struggle to grow? Do I believe that rest makes me irresponsible? Do I believe that if I let go, everything will fall apart? Do I believe that I am behind, late, or not enough in some fundamental way? These beliefs are not thoughts you think. They are conclusions you live from, and they shape reality far more than any concept ever could. When a belief loosens, something remarkable happens. Not dramatic, not explosive, but spacious. The inner pressure eases. The constant need to manage softens. The future stops pulling so hard on the present. Space appears where tension used to live. And in that space, new movement becomes possible without effort. This is the paradox many people miss. They think breakthrough requires complexity, when in fact it requires simplicity. They think expansion requires adding layers, when it actually requires removing weight. Every major shift in consciousness is preceded by simplification. Not knowing less, but holding less. Not thinking less clearly, but thinking less defensively. Not caring less, but caring without fear. When old beliefs dissolve, you do not become passive. You become available. Available to insight that is not filtered through fear. Available to opportunities that were always there, but could not reach you. Available to life as it is, instead of life as you think it should be. The mind often resists this, because beliefs feel like identity. Letting go of them can feel like losing yourself. But what you are actually losing is a story that was never fully true. Beliefs are not facts. They are habits of interpretation. And when those habits change, reality feels different, even before anything changes on the surface. This is why people who have experienced a genuine inner shift often describe it not as excitement, but as relief. A sense that something heavy has been put down. A sense that life no longer feels like a problem to be solved. They did not gain more certainty. They released the belief that certainty was required. They did not gain more control. They released the belief that control was safety. They did not gain more confidence. They released the belief that they were lacking. Quantum Leap does not ask you to become smarter. It asks you to become more honest. Honest about the beliefs you have outgrown. Honest about the effort that no longer serves you. Honest about the fear that has been quietly running the system. And this honesty does not demand struggle. It asks for presence. When you notice a belief without trying to fight it, it begins to loosen naturally, like a knot that unties itself when you stop pulling on it. The belief loses energy because you are no longer feeding it with resistance. This is how space opens. And space is not emptiness. Space is potential. Space is where new responses arise. Space is where identity reorganizes itself without force. Simplicity always comes before the leap, because simplicity removes interference. It allows the natural intelligence of life to move through you without obstruction. Think of it like clearing static from a radio signal. You do not add more sound. You remove the noise. When beliefs fall away, clarity emerges. Not because you searched for it, but because it was always there beneath the noise. This clarity does not shout. It guides quietly. It does not rush. It trusts timing. It does not demand proof. It moves with coherence. And from that coherence, change begins to appear in the world. Not suddenly in every case, but consistently and naturally. This is why Quantum Leap often surprises people after it has already begun. They realize, looking back, that the real shift happened the moment they stopped believing something about themselves. The moment they stopped believing they had to earn rest. The moment they stopped believing they were running out of time. The moment they stopped believing life was withholding something from them. Nothing new was added. Something old was released. And in that release, life had room to respond. This is not mystical. It is practical. It is the lived experience of anyone who has stopped confusing growth with accumulation. Quantum Leap does not come from knowing more. It comes from needing less. Less defense. Less justification. Less fear dressed up as effort. And when that simplicity settles in, you do not feel like you are becoming extraordinary. You feel like you are finally being honest. And honesty, more than any technique or teaching, is what opens the door to real transformation. 4. You do not raise your vibration through effort. You raise it through truth. There is a quiet pressure many people carry that rarely gets named. It is the pressure to stay high. High energy, high vibration, high mood, high awareness. Somewhere along the way, a well-intended idea became a subtle demand, and instead of feeling liberated, people began to feel monitored by their own spirituality. They started watching their thoughts with tension, correcting their emotions too quickly, judging themselves for feeling tired, heavy, or uncertain. The misunderstanding is simple, but its consequences are deep. Vibration does not rise through effort. It rises through honesty. Trying to keep your energy high often becomes another form of control, a way of rejecting parts of yourself that do not fit an ideal image of spiritual success. But energy does not respond to performance. It responds to alignment. When you pretend to feel better than you do, the body knows. When you force positivity while something inside is hurting, the nervous system tightens. And tension does not raise vibration, it contracts it. The most exhausted people are often the ones trying the hardest to stay positive. This is not because positivity is wrong. It is because positivity without truth becomes pressure, and pressure always lowers coherence. Vibration is not about feeling good all the time. It is about being integrated. It is about allowing what is present to be seen, felt, and included. When experience is welcomed instead of resisted, energy moves. When experience is rejected, energy stagnates. Many people believe that negative emotions lower vibration and must be eliminated. But emotions do not lower vibration. Resistance does. Sadness that is allowed moves like a wave. Fear that is acknowledged softens. Anger that is witnessed transforms into clarity. It is the refusal to feel that creates density, not the feeling itself. Raising vibration through truth means allowing yourself to be exactly where you are, without adding a story that something is wrong with you for being there. It means recognizing that awareness itself has a frequency, and that awareness grows when it is honest. When you stop pretending, the body relaxes. When the body relaxes, energy circulates. When energy circulates, vibration naturally rises without effort. This is why people often feel lighter after crying honestly than after forcing themselves to smile. Tears release tension. Performance stores it. Truth has a cleansing effect, not because it is dramatic, but because it removes internal contradiction. You are no longer saying one thing while feeling another. You are no longer splitting yourself in two. Integration raises vibration far more reliably than positivity ever could. There is a maturity that comes with understanding this, a quiet confidence that does not need to appear elevated. You stop managing your state and start listening to it. You stop asking, "How do I raise my vibration?" and begin asking, "What is asking to be acknowledged right now?" That question alone shifts energy. Acceptance is not indulgence. It is precision. It is meeting experience at the exact place where it can move, like allowing a river to flow, instead of trying to freeze its surface into calm. When you allow low emotions without identification, they pass. When you suppress them, they linger. This is why acceptance is the first movement of elevation. It creates space, and space is where energy reorganizes itself. Living in truth means letting your inner state be visible to you, even when it does not match your ideals. It means letting go of the belief that feeling low is failure. It means understanding that depth often feels heavy before it feels light. People who have truly raised their vibration are not constantly cheerful. They are grounded. They are steady. They are real. They know how to sit with discomfort without collapsing into it. They know how to feel sadness without becoming sad. They know how to experience fear without letting it run the system. This capacity comes from honesty, not from effort. Effort creates friction. Friction creates heat, not harmony. Vibration rises when friction dissolves, when the system becomes coherent, when parts of you stop fighting each other. This is why the truth is so liberating. It removes the inner argument. It stops the performance. It allows all parts of you to exhale. And once that happens, something surprising occurs. The emotional baseline begins to lift on its own, not because you forced it upward, but because you removed the weight holding it down. Truth does not always feel good at first. Sometimes it feels raw. Sometimes it feels vulnerable. But it always feels relieving, like setting down a bag you forgot you were carrying. This is why many people feel more peaceful after admitting, "I am not okay," than after repeating affirmations they do not believe. The admission aligns the inner world, and alignment raises vibration naturally. High vibration is not excitement. It is coherence. It is the feeling of being at home in yourself. It is the absence of internal conflict. It is the ease of not needing to pretend. From that place, positive states arise organically. Gratitude appears without effort. Joy visits without planning. Clarity emerges without struggle. And even when life brings difficulty, the vibration does not crash, because it was never dependent on conditions to begin with. This is the deeper teaching often missed in conversations about energy. You do not climb your way upward. You open your way into wholeness. The more honestly you live, the less energy is wasted. The less energy is wasted, the higher the system resonates. The higher the system resonates, the more life flows without resistance. This is not mystical. It is physiological, psychological, experiential. Truth calms the nervous system. A calm nervous system allows energy to move. Moving energy feels like expansion, clarity, and lightness. Forced positivity does the opposite. It tightens, it constricts, it creates a split between what is felt and what is shown, and every split lowers vibration. So if you are feeling low, the invitation is not to rise above it. The invitation is to move through it honestly, to feel it fully without making it your identity, to listen without fixing. That listening is intelligence in motion, and as you practice this kind of honesty, you may notice something subtle but profound. You no longer worry so much about your vibration, because you trust that truth will always carry you higher than effort ever could. In that trust, life feels kinder. In that kindness, energy stabilizes. In that stability, the quantum leap continues quietly, naturally, and without force. Not as a performance, but as a return to yourself. 5. When identity changes, the way you respond to life changes with it. There is a moment that arrives quietly, often without celebration, when you realize something fundamental has shifted. Not because your life suddenly looks different, not because circumstances have dramatically improved, but because your reactions no longer follow the same familiar patterns. The same words are spoken, the same situations arise, the same uncertainties appear, and yet, something inside you responds differently. This is where quantum leap reveals itself most clearly. Not in outcomes, not in achievements, not in visible results, but in response. Results can take time. Circumstances can lag behind. But response changes immediately when identity shifts. For most of life, reactions are automatic. They rise from the old identity like reflexes learned through repetition. Defensiveness appears before understanding. Anxiety arrives before curiosity. Anger surfaces before clarity. These reactions are not flaws. They are strategies the old identity learned to survive. When identity changes, these strategies are no longer needed. And because they are no longer needed, they begin to fall away without effort. You may notice that situations which once felt personal no longer pierce as deeply. Words that once lingered in your mind for days now pass through without leaving a wound. Challenges that once triggered panic now invite presence. This does not mean you have become indifferent. It means you are no longer filtering life through a threatened sense of self. The old identity reacted to protect itself. The new identity responds because it feels safe enough to stay open. This difference is subtle, but profound. Reaction is fast, tight, and defensive. Response is slower, spacious, and intelligent. Reaction arises from fear. Response arises from clarity. Reaction seeks to control the outcome. Response trusts the process. When identity changes, you no longer react to preserve an image, a role, or a story about who you are supposed to be. You are not protecting a fragile version of yourself anymore. There is less to defend because you are no longer living from a position of lack. This is why emotional triggers lose their grip, not because you worked hard to eliminate them, but because the identity they were protecting is no longer in charge. People often think calmness must be trained, practiced, or achieved through discipline. But true calmness appears as a side effect of alignment. It emerges naturally when there is nothing inside you that feels under threat. You do not practice being calm. You stop being at war with yourself, and calmness arrives on its own. This is one of the most reliable signs that a quantum leap is already underway. You find yourself pausing where you used to react, breathing where you used to brace, listening where you used to prepare a defense. And this pause is not hesitation, it is presence. In that pause, you are no longer trying to manage life. You are meeting it. There is a quiet dignity in this shift. You do not announce it. You do not need others to notice it. In fact, many people may not see it at all, but you feel it deeply. You feel it when you no longer replay conversations in your mind. You feel it when you stop justifying your choices internally. You feel it when you no longer need immediate resolution to feel okay. The old identity needed certainty to relax. The new identity is comfortable with ambiguity. This does not mean you stop caring about outcomes. It means outcomes no longer determine your inner stability. You act when action is needed. You speak when truth wants to be expressed. But there is less urgency, less emotional charge, less inner noise driving those actions. Quantum leap does not remove challenges. It removes unnecessary suffering. Suffering is what happens when reaction is mistaken for reality. when every event is interpreted as a threat to identity, when life feels like a constant test of worth, safety, or competence. When identity shifts, challenges are still challenges, but they are no longer personal. They are situations, not verdicts. They are moments to respond to, not stories to internalize. This is why things that once hurt deeply now feel lighter, not because you became numb, but because you stopped making them mean something about who you are. You no longer ask, "What does this say about me?" You ask, "What is being asked of me right now?" That question alone changes everything. When response replaces reaction, energy is conserved. The body does not flood with unnecessary stress. The mind does not spiral into interpretation. The heart does not close in defense. From that conserved energy, wisdom emerges. You start to sense when to engage and when to step back, when to speak and when silence carries more intelligence, when to move forward and when waiting is the most aligned action. This discernment is not learned. It arises naturally when the system is no longer overwhelmed by fear. This is why calmness appears without training. You did not practice it into existence. You simply removed the conditions that made calmness impossible. The old identity believed that vigilance was safety. The new identity understands that presence is safety, and presence changes how everything lands. A difficult conversation becomes an opportunity for clarity rather than conflict. An unexpected delay becomes space rather than frustration. A moment of uncertainty becomes curiosity rather than fear. These are not small changes. They are evidence of a deep internal reorganization. Quantum leap rarely announces itself with excitement. More often, it arrives as quiet steadiness, a sense that you are no longer being pulled around by life, that you are no longer reactive to every shift in the external environment. You may still feel emotions, but they move through you instead of defining you. You may still experience fear, but it does not hijack your behavior. You may still feel disappointment, but it does not collapse your sense of self. This emotional flexibility is not resilience built through effort. It is resilience that emerges when identity is no longer rigid. A rigid identity breaks under pressure. A fluid identity adapts. This is why response becomes the true measure of transformation. Results can be misleading. They fluctuate. They depend on timing and context. But response reveals where you are standing internally in every moment. And when you notice that your responses are kinder, slower, and more grounded, you can trust that something real has changed, even if nothing else looks different yet. This is the silent signature of a quantum leap. You no longer rush to fix. You no longer rush to defend. You no longer rush to escape discomfort. You stay. And staying is powerful. Staying with yourself. Staying with the moment. Staying with what is true. From that place, life meets you differently. Not because you demanded it, but because you are now responding from a different center. This is how the leap continues to unfold, quietly, naturally, without performance, not as a dramatic transformation others applaud, but as a deep internal shift you recognize the moment you realize that life no longer feels like something you must survive. It feels like something you can finally meet. 6. Time begins to behave differently when you are no longer in a hurry. There is a particular tension that lives inside the old identity, and it is so familiar that many people mistake it for responsibility or ambition. It is the constant feeling of being behind time, the sense that there is never enough of it, that you are late, delayed, or missing something essential. This identity experiences life as a race against an invisible clock, always measuring progress, always scanning the horizon for what should already have happened. The old identity lives in scarcity, and time is one of its scarcest resources. There is never enough time to rest without guilt, never enough time to feel complete before the next obligation arrives, never enough time to simply be present without thinking about what comes next. Even moments of joy are often rushed, half-lived, because the mind is already moving ahead. This relationship with time is not natural. It is learned. It develops when survival requires speed, when safety feels tied to productivity, when worth is measured by output. Over time, the body forgets how to move without urgency. The nervous system forgets how to trust rhythm. Life begins to feel like something that must be managed instead of something that unfolds. When identity changes, this relationship with time changes first. often before anything else becomes visible. The new identity does not rush, not because it is passive or unmotivated, but because it is no longer driven by fear of falling behind. It does not see time as an enemy. It experiences time as a field it moves within, not a force it must outrun. This is one of the quiet miracles of a quantum leap. Time itself seems to soften. You begin to notice that when you stop chasing moments, moments arrive more precisely. When you stop forcing outcomes, outcomes appear with better timing. When you stop pressuring life to hurry, life seems to cooperate in unexpected ways. This does not mean everything becomes instant. It means everything becomes appropriate. The old identity pushes because it believes that without pressure, nothing will happen. The new identity listens because it understands that pressure often interferes with timing rather than improving it. When you are no longer running, you begin to sense rhythm. You notice when to act and when to wait. You feel when a door is opening and when it is wiser to pause. This sensitivity to timing does not come from planning. It comes from presence. Presence stretches time, not objectively, but experientially. Moments feel fuller. Days feel less fragmented. There is space between events instead of a blur of obligations. Even when you are busy, there is less internal haste. You may still have responsibilities. You may still have deadlines. But the inner relationship to time has shifted. You are no longer racing against it. You are moving with it. This is what it means to synchronize with the flow. Flow does not move fast or slow. It moves accurately. When you stop chasing the future, the present moment opens. And inside the present, intelligence lives. The kind of intelligence that cannot be accessed through urgency. The kind that knows when to speak, when to wait, when to move, and when stillness is the most powerful action available. Many people believe that waiting is wasted time. But waiting without anxiety is not waiting at all. It is alignment. When identity no longer demands immediate results to feel safe, time rearranges itself. Delays become preparation. Pauses become integration. Silence becomes information. This is why people often say that after a deep internal shift, things begin to happen effortlessly, as if by coincidence. They meet the right person at the right moment. They hear the right words without searching. They find themselves in the right place without forcing it. This is not because life suddenly favors them. It is because they are no longer out of sync with life. The old identity is always early or late. It arrives too soon with anxiety or too late with regret. The new identity arrives on time because it is not preoccupied with arrival. It trusts that what is meant to meet it will do so without pursuit. This trust is not naive. It is informed by experience. It comes from noticing that urgency rarely improves outcomes, that forcing timing often distorts clarity, that the best moments in life were rarely scheduled by fear. When the pressure lifts, the body relaxes. When the body relaxes, perception sharpens. When perception sharpens, you make better decisions with less effort. This is how time begins to feel different, not because it changes, but because you do. You may notice that you no longer feel compelled to fill every moment. Silence becomes comfortable. Pauses in conversation no longer feel awkward. Empty space no longer needs justification. In that space, something settles. You stop counting how long things take. You stop asking when everything will finally align. You stop negotiating with the future for permission to feel at ease. And ironically, this is often when long-awaited changes begin to arrive. Quantum leap rarely comes to those who are watching the clock. It arrives when attention shifts away from timing and toward being. When you are no longer measuring progress every step of the way. When you are no longer asking, "Is this working yet?" The moment you stop waiting for the leap, you are already standing inside it. This does not mean you abandon intention. It means intention is no longer tense. It is held lightly. It is allowed to breathe. You still move forward, but you move forward with listening instead of pushing. You still grow, but growth happens organically, like a tree responding to seasons rather than commands. The sense of time expanding is one of the most tangible signs that identity has shifted. Life feels less compressed. You are not constantly late for your own experience. Even challenges feel different. They no longer demand immediate resolution to feel tolerable. You trust that clarity will emerge when it needs to. not a moment before. This trust restores dignity to the present moment. You stop using the present as a means to an end. You stop enduring today for the sake of tomorrow. And when you do that, today becomes alive. The paradox is simple but profound. The more you hurry, the more time slips away. The more you relax into presence, the more time seems to gather around you. This is not because you have more hours. It is because you are actually inhabiting them. The old identity lives ahead of itself, always leaning forward. The new identity stands where it is, fully, and from that grounded position, life meets you with precision. This is why Quantum Leap often feels anticlimactic when it arrives. There is no dramatic countdown, no explosive breakthrough moment, just a quiet realization that you are no longer rushing towards something that was never missing. You are here. Time is here. Life is unfolding at its own intelligent pace, and you are finally moving with it, not against it. This is when time stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a companion. Not something to beat, but something to trust. In that trust, the leap completes itself, not as an event on a calendar, but as a deep internal agreement with the rhythm of life itself. 7. You do not need more healing. You need to stop identifying with the wound. There comes a moment on the inner path when something quietly unsettling begins to appear, especially for those who have been sincere, reflective, and deeply committed to self-growth. You realize that you have done a great deal of healing. You have explored your past. You have named your wounds. You have understood where the pain came from. And yet, beneath all of that insight, there is a subtle sense that something is still holding you in place. This is not because healing has failed. It is because healing has reached its natural limit. There is a profound difference between healing and continuing to live from the story of being wounded. Healing is movement. Identification is stagnation. Healing allows energy to flow again. Identification keeps energy circulating around the same center, even when the pain has softened. The old identity often survives by anchoring itself in the past. It learns who it is by what happened to it. It organizes meaning through memory. It tells itself, sometimes very quietly, this is who I am because of what I went through. At first, this story brings understanding. It creates compassion. It explains patterns that once felt confusing or shameful. And this stage is necessary. Without it, pain remains unconscious and repeats itself. But there is a point where the story stops serving healing and starts replacing life. When identity continues to orbit the wound, even in sophisticated language, the past becomes a place you keep visiting, instead of a place you have already passed through. The nervous system stays oriented toward what was instead of what is. And no matter how gently you speak about it, the past continues to define the present. The new identity does not deny the past. It does not pretend nothing happened. It does not minimize pain or dismiss experience. But it no longer lives inside the memory. It carries wisdom forward without carrying the weight. This is a subtle but essential distinction. Healing says, this hurt me, and I am learning from it. Identification says, this hurt me, and this is who I am. The first creates movement. The second creates a loop. Many people believe they need to heal more because they still feel limited. But often, what is limiting them is not unhealed pain, but an outdated self-image that is still organized around the wound. You may notice this when you introduce yourself internally through what you survived, rather than who you are becoming. When your inner dialogue still centers around what broke you, instead of what is alive in you now. When your sense of self still depends on explaining your pain, even when the pain is no longer active. This does not mean you are doing anything wrong. It means you are ready for the next shift. The next shift is not deeper analysis. It is disidentification. Disidentification does not erase the wound. It changes your relationship to it. The wound becomes something you experienced, not something you are. It becomes part of your history, not the center of your identity. And when this happens, something remarkable opens inside you. Space. Space where the past no longer speaks over the present. Space where reactions soften because they are no longer fueled by old meaning. Space where new responses become possible without effort. This is the beginning of inner freedom. The old identity needs the wound to explain itself. The new identity does not need explanation to exist. It rests in presence. It lives from immediacy. It is not constantly referencing the past to justify how it feels now. When you stop calling yourself a wounded person, you do not become cold or detached. You become available. Available to joy without guilt. Available to rest without justification. Available to connection without suspicion. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first because the wound once provided orientation. It told you where you stood. It gave you a narrative. Letting go of that narrative can feel like stepping into unknown territory. But this unknown is not emptiness. It is openness. It is the openness of not being defined by what you survived. It is the openness of allowing yourself to be more than your story. Many people unconsciously fear this stage because it feels like betraying their past, as if letting go of the identity means invalidating what they endured. But the opposite is true. Honoring the past does not require living inside it. You honor your pain by no longer using it as a blueprint for your future. You honor your survival by allowing yourself to live beyond survival. This is not forgetting. This is integration. Integration means the past no longer demands your attention. It means the lessons have been absorbed. It means the experience has completed itself. When a wound has been integrated, it stops asking to be revisited. It becomes quiet, not suppressed, but settled. From this place, the nervous system reorganizes. The body no longer braces for repetition. The mind no longer scans for familiar danger. The heart no longer closes in anticipation of hurt. This is when inner freedom begins to feel tangible. You notice it when you stop narrating your pain to yourself. You notice it when old memories arise without emotional charge. You notice it when you no longer need others to understand what you went through in order to feel valid. This is not indifference. It is completion. Quantum leap often requires this letting go, because identity cannot shift fully while it is anchored to the wound. As long as you define yourself through injury, life continues to meet you through protection and limitation. When you release that definition, life responds differently. Not because it has changed, but because you are no longer meeting it from a guarded place. Freedom opens not through more healing, but through less identification. This does not mean you stop being compassionate with yourself. In fact, compassion deepens. It is no longer mixed with self-pity or self-definition. It becomes spacious and quiet. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" You start asking, "What wants to live through me now?" That question carries you forward. The old identity was formed in reaction to pain. The new identity forms in response to presence. Presence does not need a story. Presence does not need justification. Presence does not need to explain itself through the past. When you stand in presence, you are no longer a wounded person trying to heal. You are a whole person allowing life to move again. And as life moves, the space inside you expands. You feel less tight around memory, less defined by history, less constrained by what once hurt. This expansion is not dramatic. It is gentle. It feels like relief more than victory, like finally setting down a heavy coat you forgot you were wearing. You may still remember everything, but you are no longer living there. And this is the quiet truth many people miss. Healing is not meant to be a lifelong identity. It is meant to be a passage. When you walk through it fully, you arrive somewhere simpler. You arrive in yourself, not as someone broken and repairing, not as someone wounded and managing, but as someone present and available. In that availability, freedom does not announce itself loudly. It simply appears as ease. Ease in being who you are without reference. Ease in moving forward without explanation. Ease in allowing life to meet you without the filter of the past. This is when the quantum leap deepens, not through effort or insight, but through release. You do not need to heal more. You need to let go of who you were while healing. And in that letting go, the space you have been seeking quietly opens, not as something you achieve, but as something you finally allow. 8. Quantum leap ends, the need to become someone. There is a quiet exhaustion that many people carry without realizing its source. It is not physical tiredness, and it is not simply emotional strain. It is the fatigue that comes from always trying to become someone else, someone better, someone wiser, someone more healed, someone finally worthy of rest. For a long time, this effort feels noble. Growth is praised. Improvement is rewarded. Becoming is framed as the purpose of life. And so the old identity learns to stay in motion, always oriented toward a future version of itself that feels just slightly out of reach. The problem is not growth itself. The problem is living as if wholeness is always somewhere ahead. When your sense of self depends on becoming, the present moment is never enough. Whatever you achieve quickly becomes a stepping stone instead of a place to stand. Whatever clarity you reach is immediately evaluated against what is still missing. And slowly, quietly, life turns into a project instead of an experience. This is where deep fatigue sets in. The constant becoming keeps the nervous system in a state of subtle tension. There is always something to fix, something to improve, something to transcend. Even rest becomes conditional. Even peace feels temporary. Even joy feels incomplete because it is measured against a future ideal. Quantum Leap interrupts this pattern, not by giving you a better version of yourself, but by revealing that the entire project of becoming was built on a misunderstanding. The new identity does not need an upgrade. It needs presence. Presence is what remains when the urge to improve relaxes. It is what surfaces when you stop evaluating yourself as a work in progress. It is the quiet recognition that you are allowed to be here now, without justification, without reaching. This does not mean you stop learning or growing. It means growth is no longer driven by a sense of lack. It becomes organic instead of compulsive. It happens because life is moving through you, not because you are chasing a better identity. When identity shifts in this way, comparison loses its grip. You stop measuring yourself against others because you are no longer trying to locate your value externally. You stop tracking progress obsessively because you are no longer afraid of being behind. You stop asking whether you are doing enough because the question itself no longer feels relevant. This does not make you passive. It makes you grounded. Grounded people act from clarity, not from self-doubt. They move when movement is aligned, and they rest without guilt when rest is needed. They no longer use productivity as proof of worth or self-improvement as a shield against insecurity. The old identity believed that becoming was necessary to earn permission, permission to relax, permission to feel satisfied, permission to be seen as enough. The new identity understands that permission does not come from achievement. It comes from alignment with what is already true. This is why the future loses its hold when identity shifts. The future no longer contains your worth. It no longer holds the promise of completion. It becomes a direction, not a destination, where you finally arrive as someone acceptable. You still plan, you still envision, you still move forward, but the emotional weight shifts. The future is no longer carrying the burden of making you whole. Wholeness is recognized now. This recognition is subtle but powerful. You may notice that you no longer rush personal development. You are no longer consuming insight as if something essential is missing. You can listen, learn, and reflect without feeling pressured to transform immediately. Transformation happens anyway, but it happens gently. You stop asking, "Who should I become?" You start asking, "How can I be present with what is already here?" That shift changes everything. Living as if you are already enough does not mean you deny pain or ignore growth. It means you stop using inadequacy as a motivator. You stop withholding acceptance from yourself until conditions are met. Acceptance is no longer a reward. It is the ground you stand on. From this ground, life feels different. Effort softens. Curiosity replaces striving. Appreciation replaces comparison. You are no longer scanning your life for evidence of progress. You are inhabiting it. This is why the sense of completeness moves out of the future and into the present. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer postponing yourself. You stop living as a draft. Many people do not realize how much energy they spend holding themselves in suspension. Always preparing, always improving, always waiting to arrive. When that suspension ends, energy returns, not as excitement, but as steadiness. Steadiness feels like being at home in yourself. It feels like not needing to explain your pace. It feels like trusting your own rhythm instead of matching someone else's timeline. This is one of the quiet freedoms of a quantum leap. You stop asking life to confirm your value. You stop looking for signs that you are on the right path. You begin to sense alignment internally, and that internal sense becomes enough. You live as if you belong here. Belonging is not something you earn by becoming. It is something you remember when you stop trying to be someone else. This remembering dissolves the inner hierarchy that ranked versions of yourself as better or worse. There is no longer a future self that is superior to the present one. There is just continuity. There is just life unfolding through you, moment by moment. This does not make life smaller. It makes it more intimate. Moments become sufficient. Conversations become less performative. Choices become simpler because they are not filtered through the question of self-improvement. You begin to notice that you are less interested in impressing, proving, or optimizing, not because you gave up, but because you arrived. Arriving does not mean stopping. It means no longer being divided against yourself while moving. The old identity needed to become in order to feel okay. The new identity is okay in order to move. That reversal is everything. From this place, action is cleaner. Motivation is quieter. Direction feels intuitive instead of forced. You do not push yourself forward. You allow yourself to respond. And when challenges arise, they are no longer interpreted as evidence that you are not there yet. They are simply part of being alive. This is how the sense of enough becomes embodied, not as a thought, but as a way of standing in the world. You stop negotiating with life. You stop bargaining with the future. You stop postponing peace. You live as if you are already included. This does not eliminate desire. It purifies it. Desire no longer comes from emptiness. It comes from curiosity. It comes from engagement. It comes from the natural impulse of life expressing itself through you. And because desire is no longer loaded with desperation, it moves differently. It attracts without grasping. It unfolds without urgency. This is the quiet end of becoming, not because growth stops, but because the identity that needed growth to feel whole dissolves. You are no longer becoming someone. You are being someone. And in that being, there is room to breathe. There is room to live. There is room for life to meet you without the pressure of needing to prove that you deserve it. This is the paradox of the quantum leap. The moment you stop trying to become enough is the moment life begins to reflect that you always were, not as an idea, not as a belief, but as a lived, embodied truth. You begin to move through the world with less effort and more presence, not because you figured something out, but because you stopped carrying the weight of becoming. And that release is not dramatic. It is gentle. It is quiet. It feels like relief, like finally allowing yourself to live as if you are already here, already whole, already enough to begin. 9. The environment changes naturally when you no longer fit the old. There is a moment that feels both tender and unsettling, when you begin to notice that the world around you is no longer responding the way it used to. Not because you demanded change, not because you forced distance, but because something inside you quietly shifted, and the environment is simply adjusting to that truth. This is one of the most misunderstood phases of a quantum leap. Many people expect transformation to require dramatic decisions, bold declarations, or painful separations. They believe growth must be proven through cutting ties, burning bridges, or standing their ground in conflict. But real change rarely asks for violence, even the emotional kind. When identity changes, the environment reorganizes without struggle. You do not need to push people away. You do not need to explain yourself. You do not need to fight for space. Life has its own intelligence, and it recognizes coherence the way water recognizes gravity. When you are no longer aligned with an old pattern, the pattern loosens its hold naturally. The old identity often stayed connected out of fear. Fear of loss, fear of loneliness, fear of disappointing others, fear of being misunderstood. It held relationships together through effort, obligation, or shared history, even when the resonance was gone. The new identity does not cling. It does not need to prove loyalty by self-abandonment. It understands that alignment cannot be negotiated. This is why some relationships begin to fall away quietly, not in dramatic arguments, not in explosive endings, but in subtle distance. Conversations shorten, invitations fade, shared interests dissolve. There is no villain and no victim. There is simply a mismatch that no longer requires explanation. At first, this can feel like loss. Even when the relationship was no longer nourishing, the familiarity still held weight. The mind may question whether something is wrong, whether you should try harder, whether you are being selfish by letting go. But letting go is not something you are doing. It is something that is happening. When two frequencies no longer resonate, they stop amplifying each other. The connection softens, the bond loosens, and space opens where tension used to live. This is not abandonment. It is honesty. At the same time, new opportunities begin to appear, but rarely in loud or obvious ways. They arrive gently, a conversation that feels easy, an invitation that does not drain you, a path that feels lighter than expected. These opportunities do not demand effort to maintain. They feel natural, almost ordinary, which is why many people overlook them at first. They are not charged with urgency or promise. They simply fit. This is how you know they belong to the new identity. The old identity chased opportunities out of fear of missing out. The new identity recognizes opportunities through resonance. There is less excitement, but more peace. Less intensity, but more stability. You are no longer trying to hold on to what no longer matches you. This does not mean you become detached or indifferent. It means you become selective without force. You listen to your body. You notice what drains you and what restores you. You stop overriding those signals out of habit. This is where life begins to simplify. Quantum leap always comes with simplification. Even though the mind often expects expansion, fewer obligations, fewer explanations, fewer relationships that require effort to sustain, fewer roles that ask you to shrink or perform. This simplification is not loss. It is refinement. You stop carrying what is no longer aligned, not because you rejected it, but because it no longer sticks to you. It falls away, the way leaves fall from a tree when the season changes. The tree does not decide to let go. It responds to an internal shift. The old identity tried to manage the environment. It believed safety came from control. It stayed connected to what was familiar, even when it was heavy, because familiarity felt safer than the unknown. The new identity trusts coherence. It trusts that what belongs will stay without force, and what does not will leave without drama. This trust allows relationships to complete naturally. Some people remain, but the dynamic changes. There is more space, less obligation, more honesty. Others drift away, and surprisingly, there is relief beneath the sadness. You may notice that you no longer feel compelled to explain your growth. You do not argue for your boundaries. You do not defend your pace. You allow others to be where they are, without needing them to come with you. This is not distance. It is respect. Respect for your own rhythm. Respect for their path. Respect for the fact that alignment cannot be forced. As life simplifies, you may find that your environment becomes quieter. Fewer distractions. Fewer competing demands. More room to breathe. This quiet is not emptiness. It is space for integration. Integration requires simplicity. When too many influences pull at your attention, identity cannot settle. But when the environment softens, the inner shift has room to stabilize. This is why people often feel both lighter and more sensitive during this phase. The noise has reduced, and you can hear yourself more clearly. You notice what truly matters. You feel what is authentic. You respond to life instead of reacting to pressure. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is attunement. Attunement allows you to sense when something belongs and when it does not. Without analysis, you do not need reasons. You feel it in the body. Ease or contraction, flow or resistance. The old identity ignored these signals in order to maintain stability. The new identity honors them in order to maintain coherence. And as you honor coherence, life reorganizes around it. Your schedule simplifies. Your priorities clarify. Your environment reflects your inner state more accurately. This is not something you plan. It is something you allow. Many people fear this stage because it feels like losing control. They worry that if they do not manage everything, they will end up isolated or stagnant. But the opposite is true. When you stop forcing fit, you create room for genuine connection. Connections that remain are quieter but deeper. They do not require constant maintenance. They feel mutual rather than transactional. They are not built on shared wounds or shared struggle, but on shared presence. This is how you know the environment has shifted. You feel less busy, but more fulfilled. You have fewer options, but more clarity. You do less, but what you do matters. Quantum leap is not about upgrading your life. It is about aligning it. Alignment reduces friction. Reduced friction creates ease. Ease creates sustainability. The old identity thrived on complexity because complexity justified effort. The new identity values simplicity because simplicity preserves energy. You stop filling space for the sake of activity. You stop holding connections out of obligation. You stop saying yes to what costs you yourself. And in that stopping, something essential returns. Time opens. Energy stabilizes. Presence deepens. The environment becomes an extension of your inner state, not a battleground you must manage. This does not mean challenges disappear, but challenges no longer arrive layered with unnecessary complications. They come one at a time. They come clearly. They come with room to respond. This clarity is one of the greatest gifts of simplification. Life becomes workable. You are no longer juggling identities. You are no longer adapting yourself to fit every context. You are no longer splitting yourself across incompatible spaces. You are one place at a time. This is the quiet completion of a quantum leap. Not the accumulation of more, but the shedding of excess. Not the expansion of complexity, but the return to what is essential. And in that essential space, life feels less demanding and more cooperative. You do not need to fight the old. You do not need to reject the past. You do not need to force the new. You simply become who you are now, and the environment responds accordingly. This response may be gradual. It may unfold over months. It may surprise you in retrospect, but it will feel natural, like a landscape adjusting to a new climate. This is how you know the shift is real. There is less noise, less effort, less attachment, and in that simplicity, something profound becomes possible. You begin to live in an environment that reflects your truth, not because you demanded it, but because you no longer settled for what did not fit. That is not loss. That is alignment. And alignment, once it takes root, continues to simplify life until what remains feels honest, sustainable, and quietly alive. This is the environment of the new identity. Not impressive, not dramatic, but deeply right. And from here, the quantum leap does not need to announce itself. It simply becomes the way life meets you now. 10. The clearest sign of a quantum leap is a deep inner calm. There is a moment that does not look like success, does not feel like excitement, and does not announce itself with intensity. It arrives quietly, often unnoticed at first, and yet it changes everything. It is the moment when a deep inner calm settles in, not because life finally became easy, but because something inside you stopped arguing with life. Many people expect a quantum leap to feel exhilarating. They imagine a rush of energy, a surge of motivation, a dramatic sense of arrival. They look for signs of excitement as proof that something big has happened. But those who have truly walked through inner transformation know a different truth. Real shifts are calm, not empty calm, not numbness, but a grounded steadiness that does not need stimulation to feel alive. A sense of being okay without needing to feel high. This calm is not the absence of emotion. It is the absence of inner resistance. You are no longer fighting the moment you are in. You are no longer negotiating with reality for permission to relax. You are no longer scanning the future for reassurance. There is simply a quiet sense of being held by life, even when you do not understand where things are going. This calm does not come from having answers. It comes from no longer needing them. When identity shifts, the nervous system reorganizes. The body stops bracing. The mind stops racing ahead. The heart stops tightening around uncertainty. And from that reorganization, a feeling of safety emerges that has no external cause. This is why the calm feels almost strange at first. You may notice that nothing dramatic has changed, yet something feels deeply different. You wake up without the familiar knot of anticipation. You move through the day without the usual urgency. Even when challenges appear, they do not destabilize you in the same way. You are not excited. You are settled. And this can be confusing for those who were taught to associate growth with intensity. You might wonder if you lost your drive, if you became complacent, if something went wrong. But what actually happened is that your system stopped living in survival mode. Survival is loud. Alignment is quiet. The old identity needed constant stimulation to feel alive. It needed goals, pressure, urgency, and tension to justify its movement. Without those, it felt empty or lost. The new identity does not need stimulation to feel real. It feels grounded in presence. It experiences life directly, without needing to amplify it. This is why the calm feels stable rather than dull. You do not need reasons to trust life. You simply do. This trust is not blind optimism. It is not denial of difficulty. It is a felt sense that whatever arises, you will meet it from a place that is not fragmented. You stop asking life to prove itself to you. You stop asking when things will finally align. You stop asking how it is all supposed to work out. You stop asking what you need to do next to be okay. Not because those questions were answered, but because they no longer feel necessary. There is a quiet knowing that you are where you need to be, even if you cannot explain why. This knowing is not intellectual. It is embodied. You feel it in the way your breath settles without instruction. You feel it in the way decisions come with less internal debate. You feel it in the way uncertainty no longer triggers panic. The future loses its emotional charge. It still exists. You still plan. You still imagine. But the future no longer holds your sense of safety or worth. It becomes a direction, not a requirement for peace. This is one of the most reliable indicators that a quantum leap has already occurred. You are no longer waiting to arrive. Waiting implies that something essential is missing. Calm implies completion. This does not mean your life is complete in the sense that nothing more will happen. It means you are complete in the sense that you are no longer postponing yourself. You are not living as a temporary version of who you are. You are living as yourself now. This calm is not fragile. It does not collapse under stress. It does not disappear when things go wrong. It is not dependent on mood or circumstance. It is rooted in acceptance. Acceptance does not mean resignation. It means you are no longer in conflict with what is. Conflict is what drains energy. Conflict is what creates anxiety. Conflict is what keeps the system in constant alert. When conflict dissolves, calm appears naturally. This calm has a quality of trust that cannot be forced. You cannot talk yourself into it. You cannot think your way into it. It arrives when the inner battle ends. And the inner battle ends when identity no longer depends on outcomes. The old identity needed results to feel safe. The new identity feels safe enough to let results unfold. This is why you stop checking for signs. You stop monitoring progress. You stop measuring whether the leap has happened. The need to measure disappears because you are already inside the experience. There is a softness to this stage that is often misunderstood. It does not have the sharp edges of ambition or urgency. It does not push. It does not demand. It allows. And allowing is powerful. From this calm, action becomes more precise. You act when action is needed, not to relieve anxiety, but because something feels aligned. You rest when rest is needed, not because you gave up, but because you trust your rhythm. Life begins to feel cooperative instead of adversarial. Even when uncertainty appears, it no longer feels like a threat. It feels like an open space, a place where something new can emerge without being forced. This is why you stop asking how and when. Those questions belong to an identity that needed control to feel secure. The new identity feels secure enough to let intelligence unfold naturally. This does not make you passive. It makes you receptive. Receptivity is not weakness. It is sensitivity to timing, nuance, and direction. It allows you to move with life instead of against it. And because you are no longer resisting, life meets you with less friction. The calm deepens not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer interpreting imperfection as danger. You can be in the middle of transition and still feel at peace. You can be uncertain and still feel grounded. You can not know what comes next and still feel okay. This is not indifference. It is maturity. Maturity understands that life does not require constant evaluation. It requires presence. Presence is what this calm truly is. It is the feeling of being here without needing to justify your existence, without needing to improve the moment before allowing yourself to inhabit it, without needing to rush towards something better. You know you are in the right place, not because everything makes sense, but because you are no longer divided inside. There is no part of you arguing that you should be somewhere else. There is no part of you insisting that this moment is insufficient. There is no part of you pushing the present away. This inner agreement creates a sense of belonging that does not depend on location, status, or outcome. You belong where you are because you are fully here. This is the quiet completion of the quantum leap, not a peak experience, not a moment of triumph, but a stable ground you can stand on. From this ground, life continues to unfold. Changes still happen. Growth still occurs. Movement continues. But it all happens without the underlying tension that once drove everything. You are no longer chasing peace. You are no longer performing growth. You are no longer waiting for permission to settle. You are settled. This calm does not make headlines. It does not impress others. It may even look ordinary from the outside. But inside, it feels like the end of a long inner journey. Not because you reached a destination, but because you stopped running. And when you stop running, you realize something simple and profound. You were never lost. You were never behind. You were never broken. You were just moving through a phase where identity needed to reorganize itself. Now that it has, life feels different. Not louder, not brighter, but truer. And that truth carries a peace that does not ask to be explained. You know you are in the right place, not because everything worked out, but because you are no longer fighting where you are. This is the deepest sign of the quantum leap. A calm that does not come and go. A trust that does not demand evidence. A knowing that does not shout. Just a quiet, steady sense that you are here. You are alive. And this moment is enough to stand in. From here, whatever comes next does not need to be forced. Life will meet you, and you will meet it calmly, fully, and without resistance. The leap happens the moment you stop waiting. There is a quiet relief that comes when you finally understand this, not as an idea, but as a lived truth. A quantum leap is not something you chase, prepare for, or wait to deserve. It is not an event scheduled somewhere in the future, and it is not a reward granted after enough effort, healing, or understanding. A quantum leap is a shift in identity, and identity never changes through waiting. Waiting belongs to the old self. The old identity waits because it believes something is missing. It believes life must change first. Circumstances must improve. Clarity must arrive, or healing must complete before peace is allowed. Waiting becomes a habit, a posture, a way of standing in the world with one foot always in the future. And while waiting feels patient on the surface, underneath it often hides tension, hope mixed with fear, and a quiet refusal to fully inhabit the present moment. But the leap does not happen there. The leap happens the moment waiting loosens its grip. When you change how you see yourself, the world cannot remain the same. It may try for a while. It may echo old patterns briefly, but reality always reorganizes around identity, not the other way around. When the inner position shifts, the outer reflection adjusts in its own time, without needing to be forced. This is why trying to do more rarely produces the shift you are seeking. More effort often strengthens the old identity, rather than dissolving it. More fixing keeps you focused on what is wrong. More striving reinforces the belief that you are not yet allowed to rest. But quantum leap does not require you to add anything to yourself. It requires you to release what no longer belongs. Release does not mean rejection. It does not mean fighting the past or denying who you were. It means gently setting down roles, beliefs, and postures that once served you but no longer fit the person you are becoming. It means allowing the old strategies to retire without drama. You do not need to become someone new. You need to stop carrying who you are no longer. This is a quieter process than most people expect. It does not come with loud declarations or dramatic endings. It often feels like a soft internal decision, sometimes so subtle that you only recognize it later. A decision to stop proving, a decision to stop explaining, a decision to stop postponing your presence. And when that decision is made, even unconsciously, something inside you settles. The invitation now is simple, but not easy for a mind trained to rush. Pause, not to analyze, not to fix, not to search for answers. Just pause long enough to notice what is already here. Notice the sensation in your body as you hear these words. Notice whether there is a sense of openness, or relief, or quiet recognition. Notice if something in you feels less tight than it did before. That noticing is not passive. It is awareness returning to itself. When you listen inwardly, without expectation, you begin to sense where effort is still being applied unnecessarily. You notice where you are holding your breath emotionally, You notice where you are waiting for permission to be at ease. And gently, without forcing, you allow yourself to let go. Let go of the version of you that needed to hurry. Let go of the version of you that needed to become worthy. Let go of the version of you that believed peace had to be earned. This letting go does not make you careless. It makes you present. Presence is what remains when the future is no longer carrying your hope and the past is no longer carrying your identity. Presence is where life meets you fully, without delay. From presence, movement becomes natural, not rushed, not delayed, just right. This is why the leap often goes unnoticed at first. There is no fireworks moment where everything suddenly changes. Instead, there is a subtle shift in how you stand in yourself, a quiet sense that you are no longer waiting for life to start. You may still have goals, you may still have desires, you may still be in the middle of change, but the emotional weight attached to those things softens. They no longer determine your sense of safety or worth. You move forward, but you are no longer leaning forward. This is the paradox of the quantum leap. The moment you stop reaching for it, you realize you are already inside it. This realization does not bring excitement. It brings ease. Ease in your breath, ease in your choices, ease in your relationship with time. And ease is not laziness. It is alignment. Alignment feels like standing in the right place, even when you do not know what comes next. It feels like trusting life without needing guarantees. It feels like allowing uncertainty to exist without turning it into a problem. If you are listening to this, and something inside you feels lighter, quieter, or more grounded than before, that is not coincidence. That is not suggestion. That is resonance. Resonance happens when truth meets readiness. And readiness is not something you prepare. It is something you recognize. You may notice that the questions you used to ask no longer feel urgent. Questions like when things will change, how everything will work out, or what you still need to fix in yourself. These questions belong to a phase of becoming that is gently completing itself. Completion does not mean the end of growth. It means the end of striving against yourself. From here, growth continues without tension. Learning continues without pressure. Life unfolds without the sense that you are late to your own existence. You are here, and being here is enough to begin. There is nothing you need to add to this moment to make it valid. There is nothing you need to remove from yourself to be allowed to rest. The leap does not require proof. It does not require confirmation. It reveals itself through a simple knowing, a knowing that you are not missing life anymore, a knowing that you are no longer waiting for permission to arrive, a knowing that where you are is workable, even if it is not finished. This knowing does not shout. It does not convince. It does not argue. It simply settles. And when it settles, life responds. Not dramatically, but faithfully. Step by step, moment by moment, in ways that make sense only in hindsight. You do not need to rush the next chapter. You do not need to figure out the entire path. You only need to stay present with what is unfolding now. If you feel a quiet peace as you hear these words, trust it. That peace is not the end of the journey. It is the ground beneath it. The leap has already begun, not because you did something right, but because you stopped waiting for something outside yourself to change before allowing yourself to be at ease. From here, life will meet you, not because you chased it, but because you finally stood still long enough to let it arrive.